Hello and welcome. Thank you so much for joining me. It is great to have everyone here today. It is great to meet some new friends. Today I have with me Lone Spartan. Welcome, Lone Spartan.
Hi.
Um, I was also expecting Curse of Ham to be here. Curse of Ham is supposed to be coming. I have not heard from Curse of Ham today. Hopefully he will get here. It's possible that he wasn't real comfortable with doing this because Curse of Ham is a closeted atheist, and he has expressed some fear about anyone finding out that he's an atheist. So it's possible that he didn't come because at the last minute he realized it was just too much for him. Otherwise, I do have Spartan here today, and we will be talking. And I also threw a link in the chat. So if there's anyone in the chat that would like to come and join us, since we're down a guest today, please feel free to jump in, and I'll just bring in some extra people. I see Jenna is in the chat. Jenna, if you are free, I would love to have you. John Christian is here. Skits Crasher is here. Brainbug is here. I asked Brainbug specifically if he could jump in, but he says he's busy right now. He is making pancakes at the moment, apple, cinnamon, and banana, and that sounds delicious.
Yeah, that sounds really good.
Mhm. And Jenna says hugs to Curse of Ham. Okay, Lone Spartan, so tell us a little bit about yourself. We haven't had you on here before, and I don't know, have you ever been on a live stream before?
I believe with two people. I think I went on with Craig Reed, a
Mm-hmm.
Christian YouTuber, and then I went on with Jeffrey Williams, um, I believe. And then me and my friends, we had a YouTube channel for like a couple months. Didn't work out because of school. So yeah, I've done a few, but
Okay, well, tell us a little bit about yourself.
I was raised in a IFB church. If anyone doesn't know what that stands for, Independent Fundamentalist Baptist. All three words you don't usually want to mix, but uh, I was raised IFB in the Midwest, which, if anyone, I'm fairly sure most of your followers would know about it, but
Most of
they're
them do. I've done a couple of videos specifically on the new IFB, the NIFB, which is Steve Anderson and his group. But I
oh
I
yeah.
did talk a little bit about the IFB because there's been a lot of fractures in the NIFB, and the pastors that are leaving the NIFB are returning to the IFB.
Yes, there's a whole situation going on amongst them. You got Baptists, and then amongst Baptists, you got IFB, and then amongst IFB, you got like several different types of IFB. But I was raised traditional IFB, I guess would be the word
Okay.
there. So raised for about 12 years, and then once I was about 12, we moved to a different church. But once I was about 12, I started to kind of question things, normal stuff for 12-year-old. I kind of got more social because for that 12 years, I was pretty isolated. I had like one friend throughout my
Mhm.
entire time, which he was sheltered just as I kind of. Um, and I got to 12, started questioning things, and then once I hit 13, I really started looking at stuff, reading. That was the first time I was really exposed to social media. So I really started getting into social media, talking to people. And at that time, I was still very Christian. I would
Mhm.
talk with apologists and use the Frank Turek responses and all that type of stuff. Read William Morgan's books. All of that happened. And then about a year after that, I'm about 14, maybe 14 and a half, I really started to dig into everything, philosophy, history, all that stuff. And while I was still Christian, I kind of, it all kind of started to kind of fall apart, if that makes sense. It just started to go downhill. And then I turned 15 like I'm close to 16 now, so about 9 months ago, I would say I like fully said, all right, I don't think I can reasonably call myself a Christian.
Okay.
So I kind of deconverted, and then, still was in that deep, well, maybe Christianity is true, trying to kind of rationalize it.
Mm-hmm.
And then
Mm-hmm.
after about a month of that, I was like, you know what, this isn't working. So we're gonna kind of look at things as objectively as possible. So I'm not gonna call myself an atheist because I don't really know. I don't really think I would accept that. But I'm
Okay.
not a Christian.
Okay.
So, and then after a little bit, I was like, all right, I'm a non-religious theist or something like that. And
Mm-hmm.
then after a while, I was like, well, even theism in general, without Christianity or Islam or Judaism, it's like I really don't know if I can hold that even. So I was like, we'll go to a a deism type thing, and I stuck with that for months. That's kind of where I've been at.
Mm-hmm.
Recently, I got involved in a lot of the um, paganism world, that type of stuff, which I find really enjoyable. I like it. It appeals to me, but that's a different conversation. So for now, I'm kind of still stuck in that deist spot there.
Okay. Now, you, I didn't realize that you were a minor. So do you still live with your parents then?
Yes, I'm 16, just there. Yeah, 16.
Okay.
Um, and I still live with my parents. Although I'm going through a school program where I'll graduate in like half a year, somewhere in there. So
Oh,
yes.
and what will you do then? Will you go to college then?
Um, it depends. My mom teaches at a college, so I might go through her program. I don't know yet. I'm still kind of undecided on that.
Mm-hmm. How do your parents feel about your deconversion?
That's an interesting question. I really haven't sat down and really discussed it with them yet. It's still
Okay.
something steered away from. But, I have kind of said that like I don't really think I would call myself a Christian. And my mom's pretty cool with it. She's like, all right, just go with what you feel is correct, I'll pray for you, that type of stuff. My dad, I haven't really talked to him as much as I have my mom. It's kind of been a mix between, you know, volatile, if that makes sense. Why would you do that? That doesn't make any sense. And like, well, at least don't be pagan type thing. That was kind of the two responses I got. So between my two parents, they're completely different. In total, I don't really get into it a lot. So they're not really big on discussing religious topics besides going to church and stuff. So it's it's a mixed reaction.
Okay. Um, I've just been warned that I'm not sure that I can have you on the show without your parents' consent. Um, do your parents know that you're doing this?
Yeah.
Okay, your mom knows that you're on the show and you have permission to be on the show?
Yeah, that's all. That was all figured out before.
Okay. Okay. Thank you for that, Pale Blue Mama. Yeah, that is a good point, and I did not realize that Lone Spartan was a minor when I started this show. Um, I just assumed that you were an adult.
Yeah, I probably should have clarified that. I didn't really think much of it. So,
Skits Crusher says, "I wish I was thinking that critically when I was your age."
I mean, you could call it critically. At first, it wasn't critically at all. It was more like, a lot of cognitive dissonance where I was just kind of like really trying to like convince myself It
Mm-hmm.
wasn't until like a year ago where I really said, "All right, we're going to look at this critically." But I'm definitely glad that I had those doubts earlier in life. I know a lot of people have them. They'll have them. They'll go through seminary sometimes, college, and even for you, I know it was way later in life, that type of
Mm-hmm.
stuff. And then they kind of look at it. I'm glad I had it early. Kind of saw it. I can kind of live my life later on, young, where I want to go with it, but yeah, I wouldn't call it critically necessarily.
Mm-hmm. Okay. What for you was the issue that started, if you remember, the cognitive dissonance?
So I've always, since a very young age, probably like 6, somewhere in there, um, I was always interested in like theological issues. So Adam and Eve, um, what the Bible says about creation, Jesus' death and resurrection, type of stuff. I was always asking questions about that,
Mm-hmm.
but I think it was. I don't remember if it was. I think it was a Sam Harris video I found. I watched it and kind of started to like, oh, okay, maybe these are reasonable. And then dug more into it, kind of went down the rabbit hole, and that's when all the doubts are like, oh, okay, maybe this doesn't make as much sense as I thought it does, but I'm gonna rationalize it so it does. That
Mm-hmm.
type of thing. So it probably started with like Sam Harris and Richard Dawkins and all those people.
Yeah, I could definitely relate to that because whenever I found anything that didn't make sense when I was a believer, I just chalked it up to, well, I just don't understand this, and God will explain it to me when I get to heaven.
Yeah, I mean, in the philosophical world, that a lot of people have the whole skeptical theism um, outlook, which is I don't know why this happens. I don't know what's going on or why this is the case, but there must be a case because it's God. So, that
Hmm.
can kind of go away then. That happens when you talk about evil. Why did God allow the Holocaust? Well, I don't know. That's just, we'll figure
Right.
that out later. So
Well,
that's the type of thing that goes on a lot in a lot of different people.
that the H word, Twitter, YouTube and Twitter do not like the H word. Um, I actually always heard it explained that that was God's way of getting Israel back together as a nation, that that was part of God's plan for ushering in the end times. Um, which, as a believer, I was like, oh, okay, that makes sense because as a believer, you're always taught that hurting people along the way is okay as long as you end up getting to the good part, like the genocide of the Canaanites was okay as long as you cleared the land for the Israelites, and all these horrible things are all okay as long as God's purposes end up being accomplished. It all comes down to Romans. Gosh, now I can't even think. Romans 8:28, for all things work together for good for those who love the Lord and are called according to his purpose. If God's purpose is what is accomplished, then whatever happened is good. The ends justify the means.
Yeah, and that's kind of a very interesting topic to hit on. But in ancient Israel, there was kind of assumption there wasn't really hell necessarily. There was
Mhm.
punishment in the
Right.
afterlife, but it wasn't the fiery eternal torment that we kind of think of now. Even in the New Testament, you definitely have the idea of vengeance. You do bad here, you don't believe in Jesus or whatever. There's going to be a cleansing of some kind um, in the afterlife. But I wouldn't even say you could really say that's the hell we think of now. Their conceptions of it were very different from how we look at it now. A lot of things like I guess hell, creationism, Calvinism, even Protestantism in general, kind of came along late in Christianity. A lot of the ideas we think of eternal conscious torment and God creating the earth in 6 days and all that type of stuff is a newer development within Christianity that has taken root over the past couple hundred years.
Mm-hmm. Now, you mentioned earlier the IFB. Now, one of the things that I always associate with the IFB is the King James only movement. Was your church one of those, the King James only churches?
No,
No.
but
Okay.
I have friends who are in those types of churches that are also
Okay.
IF. So ours wasn't, but we knew a lot of churches that are. So there's about a half and half split on that.
Okay. What are some of the things that you saw in the IFB church, without using any names, of things that went on that caused you, that were mental issues for you?
So I think one misconception about the IFB church is a lot of people, especially if they're really familiar with it, think that they're just very openly, anti-LGBTQ, super burn in hell if you disobey type thing. And they're really not. They're very charismatic and kind people, but under the surface is where you kind of dig into that.
Mhm.
So it's kind of a process of, it's not a direct on impact, so to speak. It's very much over the course of time you get these ideas. It's slid into different conversations. It's under the rug. So one of the mental issues I had was conceptualizing, you know, how we could, how these people could be so nice and kind, but also believe all these bad things. So that was one mental stumbling block. Another one of it was just in general, I was very socially isolated. I was taught that hell was for the greater good of humanities type thing. We were taught that um, a lot of purity culture and that type of stuff. It was all drilled in, but it was hard for me to understand, especially a few years ago, how that relates to Christians being these nice people that we go over to their house for dinner. So a very big mental block for me to get over was the fact that Christians were nice, but they weren't. That was a
Mhm.
very big thing for a long time.
Mhm.
Um, Another one was just in general, especially at our old church. I didn't realize it then, but everyone was very stuck on stuff. And in fact, we ended up having to leave that church because my mom, she's a social worker, teaches psychology, and we ended up having to leave because they didn't want her. They didn't like her. Everyone was mean to her because she was practicing secular mental health. The only mental health they had there was going to a conference with the pastor, and he's going to read you some Bible verses and tell you to sin less, and then your mental health will be better. That type of
Goodness
thing.
gracious.
Yes, that was a big thing. My mom was really not happy about that. So they didn't like her. So it's like, well, you're having anxiety and stress and all that type of stuff, not because, your husband was cheating on you and one of your kids is in the hospital. It's because you're sinning. If you stop sinning, then it'll all get better. That was a very big thing. One thing that was probably the most harmful. Um, and that was a huge thing also. Just other little things that all kind of cumulatively made me really question what I was doing. Now, I was still open to Christianity as a concept, whether it was Catholicism, Orthodoxy, all that type of stuff. I was still very open to it, but
Mhm.
I rejected IFB way early on, after really looking at that stuff. So I would just say IFB was only part of my total deconversion. Um,
Mhm.
yeah.
Now, when you were IFB, and I realize it wasn't that long ago, were you aware of the NIFB, the New Independent Fundamentalist Baptist?
So amongst IFB, there wasn't a big discussion in terms of NIFB, distinction between NIFB and IFB. Um, Now thinking back on it, now that I've kind of learned about that distinction, there was definitely people I were friends with from the church that were in IFB, and there were some that were traditional IFB. But at the time, it was murky water. You would have some people that were kind of in the middle. There were still
Mm.
IFB, they were in the middle. So it wasn't really a big thing then.
Hmm.
Yeah.
Did you ever have any denominational events? Like conferences where you would get together with the whole denomination?
Yes. So we had different types of conferences that would happen. You'd have speakers. At my old church, it was very Calvinist, so we'd have Calvinist speakers come up, give sermons. We had missionary conferences that missionaries would come up and share their stories. We had like intersectional stuff that would go on, so we'd have times where IFB would go over to Lutherans, and Lutherans would come over, and we'd have conferences. So yeah, we had that type of stuff. Um, for a good amount of time. I mean, it wasn't super common, but we had it.
Hmm. Hmm. I didn't realize the IFB was Calvinist.
So not all of them are. You have IFB that
Ah,
are
okay.
Arminian. You have some that are Calvinist, such as my old church, very Calvinist, strictly Calvinist. You weren't Calvinist and you were practically a heretic. And then you have IFB, which were Arminian and very much more like, well, you can kind of choose. And that was kind of the second church we went to. Now,
Hmm.
for reference, the second church we went to, um, very much better than the first one. I liked it better. Nobody was super harmful. I mean, there was doctrinal things going on, but beyond that, it was an okay church. Um, but the first one, super Calvinist. There's always issues going on amongst other IFB folks. If you're IFB, you can be IFB, but if you're Arminian, you're still a heretic. If you're Arminian and there's an IFB that's Calvinist, well, they're a heretic. So there is definitely that type of theological debate and rhetoric that goes around.
That's interesting. When I was in a Calvinist church, a lot of the people who founded the church had come from a Baptist church. And what you said is very consistent with the Baptist denomination because they are inconsistent. I have been to a number of Baptist churches, and some of them are Calvinist, and some of them are Arminian, and some of them are kind of in between, just as you said. And the church that I went to that was very staunch Calvinist, they never looked down on people who were not Calvinist. That was one thing that was a little bit different. They felt like, you know, you've got doctrine wrong, but just because you got your doctrine wrong isn't a salvation issue. That's just a doctrinal issue. And one thing that was also interesting is this church even accepted that Catholic people could be saved. And when I say could be, I don't mean that it's possible for them to be. I mean, if regardless of what they believe about Catholic doctrine, if they believe that they've accepted Christ, then they are saved, regardless of whether they also happen to believe in transubstantiation or they also happen to believe in baptizing babies. That all that's important is accepting Christ. Um, and everything else is important, but not important to the point of being a salvation issue. Is that kind of what it was like at your church?
So at our church, it was much more polarized.
Mhm.
The first one, it was very much Calvinist good, Arminian bad, heretic, gonna go to hell. Catholics definitely not. That was a no-no.
Mm.
Um, we didn't deal with the Orthodox. Nobody really does. But you know, Arminians, heretics, Catholics, heretics, um, Lutherans, well, they're almost heretics. They're close. Um,
Mhm.
Ours was very against pretty much anyone that wasn't them, was how it worked. Our second church, they were like a mix between that Calvinist and Arminian. They were much more open. Catholics for Christians. Um, Calvinists and Arminians were Christians. Orthodox were Christians. You know, even Episcopalians were Christians. So the first one, just definitely that's not how it worked. Second one, that pretty much sums it up. Yeah.
Episcopalians generally are Calvinist.
Yes, in general, I mean, I've met some that believe in, especially your like super progressive Episcopalians will
mhm.
have the Arminian view, but yeah, in general, they lean Calvinist.
I see Dr. Osiris saying, I honestly never heard of Calvinists or however you spell it until recently. And so I'll go ahead and explain a little bit about what the major difference with the Calvinist doctrine as opposed to the Arminian doctrine is the Calvinists say that God chose the saved before creation, that even before he made anybody, he selected a group, and those are the elect, and those were chosen to be saved, and those are the ones that will be saved. And one of the big things that you see is the interpretation of John 3:16. The Arminian says that anyone can be saved. You simply choose to believe in God, and if you believe, then you are saved. And the Arminian looks at John 3:16 and reads, "For God so loved the world that he gave his one and only Son, that whosoever believes," whosoever meaning absolutely anyone. The Calvinist looks at those exact same words and says, "For God so loved the world that he gave his one and only Son, that whosoever believes," which means whosoever was chosen to be a believer. Not anyone can be a believer, but whosoever believes, whosoever was chosen to be a believer. And they back that by a number of verses that talk about God choosing. And even one where Jesus says, I chose you. You did not choose me, but I chose you. Although, if you look at the context of that particular verse, he's talking about the choosing of the apostles, but they generalize that to all people. And so it's really easy to support either side with the verses in the Bible. The main reason that the Calvinists say that this is the correct way to interpret Scripture is because of the sovereignty issue, and they consider that to be tantamount. That God is sovereign over everything. God is in control of everything. And if people choose whether or not they're going to believe in God and choose whether or not they're going to be saved, then God isn't sovereign over heaven. Man decides who goes to heaven and not God. And that for them is the major issue, that God is sovereign over everything.
Yeah, that pretty much explains it. You know, Calvinists, you have soft Calvinists who are like God chooses the people who are saved before
Mhm.
creation, and then you have your super hard Calvinists where you know God predetermined everything, whether it's who's saved, what you're doing right now, how the flower fell on the ground off your roof. That's
Mhm.
all predetermined. So you kind of have varying levels of Calvinists, but in general, it all kind of comes down to that idea of predestination.
Right.
So God created billions of human beings, but there's only a select few that he'll actually let believe in him. Other ones, whatever, they can go to hell, basically.
Right. Exactly.
So
Exactly.
it's kind of one of those like, I think I saw the meme like, the Calvinist God doesn't hate you, he just doesn't he's just really not that into you. Like, they'll tell you that, well, he doesn't hate unbelievers, he just doesn't want them to believe in him or go to heaven, you know? He doesn't really hate them. He's just not really, he doesn't really like them either. So it's I find it just super morally a terrible position. I mean, especially given that Calvinism lays the groundwork of supersessionism. Um, it, Christianity took over Judaism. You know, Jews really shouldn't exist. They should all be Christian. Um, Narcissism. Well, I'm predetermined and you aren't, so whatever. It lays the groundwork for a lot of different issues. So personally, I just hate Calvinism outright. I know that upsets a lot of people on Twitter and YouTube, but outright, I'll tell you, I just hate it, and that's just what I feel.
I would agree with you. I definitely am not a fan of Calvinism anymore, and although I am thankful to Calvinism for one thing, is the cognitive dissonance that is required to be a Calvinist is so great that that was able to break my faith. And I think if I had stayed in an Arminian church, I'm not sure if it would have been as easy for me to deconvert. Because one of the things that I looked at as a Calvinist was how selfish it is. I even asked my pastor this at one point. Isn't God awfully selfish that, you know, all this is for his glory? All these people are being sent to hell for his glory. And the pastor's response was, well, but that's everything. God's glory is everything, and that's the only thing that matters. And because God is the only thing that matters, everyone dying, any suffering, it isn't important as long as God is glorified, because that's all that matters.
Yeah, yeah, it's they very much have a very hypocritical and contradictory explanation. It's God loves everyone, all of creation to his glory, but only this minute part of his creation and people does he really actually love. Everything else doesn't matter. But he's also cares about it all. So it's a very weird position. You know, it takes a lot of misinterpreting the New Testament. That's one big thing, especially someone who, although I'm not a Christian, I really like reading the New Testament, the Old Testament, understanding the meaning of it. They really like to take the verses there and screw them all up. So, you know, that's a big thing. It just takes a lot of mental gymnastics to be
Mhm.
a Calvinist.
Junie has a really good question. I'm going to get to your question, Junie, but I want to bring this up before I forget because it's not in the chat, and otherwise I might forget. But you mentioned something about the people there saying that God doesn't hate people who are unbelievers. And I found that interesting because that is in direct contrast to what I was taught. Because one of the things that did cause a lot of cognitive dissonance for me was Romans chapter 9, and specifically the verse, Jacob I loved, but Esau I hated. And that is one of the major bases that uh, Calvinists use to show that the decision of who is saved and who is not saved has absolutely nothing to do with anything that you did, right or wrong, because the verse makes it quite clear that before they were before they were born, before they did anything good or bad, Jacob I loved, but Esau I hated. God simply chose to love Jacob and chose to hate Esau just because that was his sovereign will.
Yeah, so I said that in a sense that that is what they say. Do they really do that? No. No, they'll tell you, well, they're in sin, they're going to go to hell, if you're gay or whatever. Well, that's not a good at all. Do they really believe it or live it out? Usually not. I mean, I know people who will give the shirt off their back to anyone, and I like those people, those people are nice. I don't agree with them, but they're nice. But a lot of them, they definitely don't live that out. They're all very snarky Catholics. Like, my big issue with it is even people within their own religion, Catholic, Arminian, Lutheran, all those people, they still don't like them either. So that they say, well, God doesn't hate unbelievers, which is interesting given their entire doctrine and how they live it out. But that's what they'll say. That's not what they do. Um, that's kind of how it worked.
Mhm. Okay, Junie says, my question is, how do they know that they were chosen? And that is an excellent question. That's another question that I asked my pastor. How do I know for sure that I'm one of the chosen? And I'll go ahead and answer what I was told, and then Spartan, I'll let you give a chance to answer what you were told. I was told that it is not possible for someone to love and serve God if they are not chosen. And that is one of the things that I actually still take a little bit of comfort in that when Christians come at me and say, "Well, you were never a Christian." I spent 42 years of my life serving. I mean, I was teaching, I started a library, I sang in the choir, I went on mission. I did everything. And no one can tell me that I lacked doing something. And because of my failure to do something, I wasn't saved. So the answer to the question is, and Junie, that question is the one that I exactly turn back on Calvinists, because if they question how, you were never a Christian, then I turn back to them and say, okay, if I could serve God for 42 years and then it turned out that I was never one of the chosen, then you can't know if you're one of them either. Because unless you continue to believe until the day you die, you are not chosen either. And you will not know until the day you die whether you are a believer or not.
Yeah. I've asked my parents this. I've asked our pastor this, our former pastor. I've asked friends who are Calvinists this. I've asked apologists who are Calvinists this. And it comes down to like a couple answers. Number one is, well, only God knows, right? Only God knows if you're a true Christian, which it just doesn't work because, well, then who are you to judge unbelievers? Could a gay person be Christian? Only God knows. So it comes back to that whole everything in it is kind of unfalsifiable. Well, this all just comes back to, well, God knows. We don't know, but God knows.
Mm-hmm.
And then the second answer is fruits of the spirit. You'll know them by their fruits. That's a
Mm-hmm.
big. Um, well, if they follow the fruits of the spirit, they read their Bible, they do all this, then they'll be Christian. They'll be fine. They'll be. And it seems interesting given how many atheists, unbelievers, people I know follow the fruits of the spirit 10 times better than some Christians. So that's another big issue. So it really comes down to those two. How do they know they're saved? Well, either God knows or they live it out, quote unquote. Both I find issues in, but that's probably the two answers you're going to get. I haven't really heard a third. I've heard
Mm-hmm.
them put differently, but never really a full third answer.
And Dr. Osiris says, I've been known to literally give the shirt off my back more than enough times. Funny thing is, I wasn't like this when I was a Catholic.
Yeah, so I was never Catholic, so I can't really tell you how that whole system works. But that seems to kind of be the thing. I won't say Christians aren't good. There are plenty of Christians out there, millions in the U.S. that go to church on Sunday, they go to work on Monday morning, and they're fine. It's just the few that are it's different, I guess. For example, many of the people who went to our church, they were in on a lot of the doctrinal stuff, and they kind of okay, but they really only went there on Sunday morning. Rest of the week, they acted just as an atheist would, a Jew would, anyone else, anyone that wasn't Christian, they would act exactly like them until it came to Sunday morning. It really wasn't until you got to your staunch people, your people that were set in your ways, that you would get the really bad behavior, the people who would judge pastors, deacons, worship leaders. There were a lot of families at that time that were super, my mom, she worked out of the house. They did not like that. They thought women should be only in the home. They should not work. They should only take care of the kids. A lot of families like that. So I can't speak on the Catholic, but that's kind of my experience with it. Is most of them, they're fine. I mean, at church, you're like, nah, you're not very good. I don't really agree with you. But the rest of the week, they're reasonable human beings.
Hmm.
So it's just one of those things.
People are people.
Yes, most
Hmm.
people act normally. It's just the few that you get that
Hmm.
are kind of out there with their uh, views.
Oh, I missed saying hello. I've been kind of typing hello to people as we go along, but I missed the trusty atheist excuse me, the trusty ape podcast. Hello, trusty ape podcast. Um, okay. Any other issues that you saw, not, either in your church in particular or in the denomination in general, of things that were just, um, really either fracturing to your faith or that you saw that just weren't right?
So there were a lot of political issues I saw that they didn't necessarily affect my confidence in Christianity as a whole, but they certainly made me look at, and even to this day, at what certain denominations, you know, anti-gay rights, anti-women's rights, anti all that stuff, you know, all that stuff. It really made me question at the time, like, are we really the good guys here? Are we the people that are should be going to heaven? Are we the people here that should be the good guys? Are we on the right side of history? Um, so that was a big thing. A lot of political issues that went on that I looked at, and just in general, issues with the historicity of the resurrection, for example, or the issues with God's existence, whether it be the problem of evil, divine hiddenness, all that stuff. It really all boiled down to I don't know if Christianity is true. It very well might be, here and
Mhm,
there. I hope it is. Um, I really do hope it is. I hope universalism is true, but in general, I do wish here and there that it was true. But overall, I think I've kind of gotten over the idea of what I was in being true. So
mhm, mhm,
IFB being true, Calvinism being true, all that creationism. That was another big thing. Um, Watched a ton of Ken Hogan and Ken Ham. That could go on for hours, but um,
Ken
so
Ham, I understand, but Hovind? They showed you Hovind?
so Ken Ham was huge. Kent Hovind was one that I kind of found along the way of Ken Ham. So, I would read books of Ken Ham. I just recently got rid of him, but I have like his entire creation book series. Um, we've watched videos. Uh, a lot of my friends and family have taken trips to his museums and all that stuff. Very big. I watched a ton of his YouTube videos. And then as that happened, I stumbled on Hovind. They didn't
Mm,
necessarily show you Hovind. I mean, once I started watching it, my dad started watching it a little bit, so now he's kind of into that. But
mhm,
um, it wasn't really that they showed me Hovind. He was just kind of one of the people in total. I found Tuning for Truth and um, Darth Dawkins and Mr. Batman and all those people who aren't necessarily mainstream that people at your church are going to show you, but they're a byproduct of watching Into the Genesis.
mhm. Did you grow up watching Veggie Tales?
Yes, yes, I did. I still like Veggie Tales. I think the creator of them, he's a pretty cool guy.
Mhm,
Um,
mhm.
yep,
Phil
I
Vischer.
grew. Yep, I grew up watching Veggie Tales a lot. We'd have movie nights at church, always Veggie Tale movies. We'd reenact stuff. All came out of Veggie Tales. So yeah, we were also big into Veggie Tales.
Did you ever watch Bible Man?
Um, I think we did. Yes, to be honest, a lot of that stuff I just ignored. I would always be
Okay,
messing around the corner.
okay,
So I think we did. I just wouldn't remember it vividly.
okay. That's fair. Um, do you have any siblings?
I do. I have a younger brother and a younger sister.
Okay. Do your siblings know how you feel about Christianity?
Um, in a sense, I mean, they kind of get their information about what I believe from my dad. So, something will come up along the lines of Jesus or God or whatever. And they'll be like, well, you're an atheist. Well, no,
Oh,
not really.
okay.
So they kind of they have a reaction, but it's nothing like they're not like, oh, you're going to hell or anything. It's more just like they follow my dad's footsteps when they can, but for the most part, they don't really care. They're
Mm-hmm.
not. I mean, my brother's 13, so he was in the same age range, but he definitely doesn't care about it like I did. He goes to church, hang out with friends. He just goes to church to be with friends. That's it. He doesn't. He's been baptized, but I I don't really know how much he puts value in it. So neither of my siblings really care. The only one in my family that really cares a whole lot would be my dad. And again,
Okay.
I don't really give a ton about it. So yeah, I mean they're okay.
Okay. We have a question from the chat, sort of. It says, I have no idea what Veggie Tales might be. Veggie Tales are children's videos. They actually made a full-length movie as well. They always tell a Bible story, but they tell it through some animated vegetables. They're claymation. Larry the cucumber and Bob the tomato are the two main characters, and then there's other characters depending on what they need. The full-length movie that they made was Jonah, and there's some really good music in a lot of the Veggie Tales. There's some really good humor in the Veggie Tales. I wouldn't recommend the theology. Sometimes even as a Christian, I kind of on the theology, although I never really considered it bad. I just considered it, well, that's not quite right, but this is a kids video. How technical can you get on theology with a kids video? But it mostly was just a retelling of Bible stories.
Yeah, I mean the theology in it was actually ironically a debate in a few of the families around like, you know, Veggie Tales doesn't have the right theology. Our kids shouldn't be watching it, which,
Hmm.
it was very funny. They couldn't watch a lot of stuff. Harry Potter, that was a no-no. Land Before Time, the animated dinosaur show for kids, that was a no-no as well because
Mm,
it teaches evolution. Um, we had even things like Dumbo and stuff like that because it mimicked magic. Pinocchio. Well, that's not okay. Magic. So
mhm,
there was a lot that went on. Really all that you could watch was super corny Christian kid stuff. So Veggie Tales for some families. Sometimes that was even a no-no. Um, but yeah, that there was a lot that went on in that church that you kind of look back and you're like, that is extremely stupid. But you know,
now, I assume your dad still goes to church?
so over the past year, we've moved around a lot. Sorry,
It's okay.
we've moved around a ton. We've kind of we've over the past year we've been in like 4 different places,
Mhm,
so we've not really settled on a church yet. But he's definitely, now that we're kind of permanently in a spot, he's he's definitely very active in wanting us to go to church. We haven't done it yet because usually I work and my mom works and my dad works. Like we all work like 6 out of 7 days of the week,
mhm,
so we don't really get time, but he would definitely do it if we got the chance, yes.
m'kay. Would he make you go?
Yes, yeah.
Okay.
As long as I'm under 18, I have to go to whatever church they choose, no matter if
Mhm,
I agree with it or not.
mhm.
So, even if it's another IFB Calvinist church, I still gotta go until I'm 18. And then after that, I can go to whatever church, but I still have to go to that one. So that's not something I'm looking forward to because I don't know how I would react in that situation. But yeah, so if we decided to go to another church like we did, I would have to go. Um, I've tried to get them to go to other churches. I've wanted to visit an Orthodox church, given I think the Orthodox are the most internally consistent and theologically consistent. But I've tried to get them to go there. I've tried to get them to go to a Lutheran church, none of which they really took the bait for. So, yeah, I'll
Hmm.
probably end up going to another Baptist church sometime in here.
Maybe you can talk them into a Universalist church.
There's actually one just up the road, and every time we pass it, my dad gives it a smirk, and whenever I mention it, he's like, "No, they're heretics." So probably not.
Uh, what if your mom didn't want to go?
That would be an interesting story because my mom would never flat out say she doesn't want to go. She would say
Mm,
she's at work, she's got a headache, she's tired, she's got stuff to do. So
hmm
she would do that all the time with her other church, but she would never say she doesn't want to go to that church. Um, she wouldn't tell my dad, "Oh, I don't think this is a good church." She would just say until she was bullied at the other church, then she was like, "I don't want to go there." But you
hmm
know, if we found a church where she wasn't bullied, even if the theology is terrible and people are terrible, she's like, she's not ever gonna say, "I want to go to a different church." So I don't know what would happen if she said that. They might change churches, but it'd probably be another church, another Baptist church right down the road. So
hmm
yeah,
hmm Almost a doctor says, I've been to a few Lebanese Maronite churches, and they are a bit crazy, like Catholics on steroids.
yeah. So my nana, our Italian grandmother, she's she's she used to be Pentecostal, so
Mhm,
they're nuts as well. Very, very enthusiastic about what they believe. So you definitely have churches out there who are like that. Of course, they're also heretics too, so don't get me started on that.
mhm. Well, we've been going for nearly an hour now, and those are pretty much all the questions that I had for you. Is there anything about your experience that you wanted to share that I didn't ask you about?
All I would say, just overall, is try to look at things unbiasedly as possible.
Mhm,
You may have a position, atheist. I have a lot of pagan friends who I enjoy.
mhm,
Pagan, Catholic, whatever you are, try to look at things as unbiasedly as possible. Does this make sense without my presuppositions? So that's one thing I always have to keep in mind. That's one thing that I always tell people is if you're deconstructing or you're still a Christian, just looking at it, um, just just try to be as unbiased as possible.
Okay, I think that's very good advice. I think that's something we could all take to heart. Um, just to let you, well, first, before I let you know what I have coming up, Spartan, do you have anything that you would like to give a shout out to, a favorite channel that you want to promote? Or are you thinking about possibly doing any kind of content, or maybe you have a TikTok or Snapchat or something that you want to promote?
Um, right now, I'm active on Discord and Twitter. So on
Okay.
Twitter, it's Lone Spartan. I think it's L, and then as the O, it's a 0, and then Spartan, but the T is a 1, just due to copying purposes. So on that's on Twitter, and then on Discord, I have a Discord server, Philosophical Twats. I think I have the link in my Twitter bio. I might not. If not, I'll go change that later. But those are really the only two places right now. Me and my friends, we might do a podcast, but that's a little bit down the road, probably this summer sometime.
Okay. And I do have a link to Spartan's Twitter in the description of the video. So if you would like to get a hold of Spartan and talk to him a little bit further about some of his experiences, that is available in the description. And what I have coming up this week, I'm doing Matt Walsh. Matt Walsh has made an absolute horse's patootie out of himself, and Ehrlich has exposed what he has done with a fake documentary, and I am also talking about what he has done there. And I've used a lot of Eli's work, but I also have some of my own work tagged on to show some of the other things that he's done that have been frankly hypocritical. Next week, there will not be a stream. Next week is my husband's birthday, and so I'm taking the night off to celebrate his birthday with him. And then I will be back the following week. And let's see, who is my guest the following week? Tall, Friendly Atheist Dad will be on March 2nd. And so that should be fun. And I'm sorry that Curse of Ham was not able to make it here. I don't know if he ran into some issues. Maybe there was a time issue, or maybe he just felt that he just wasn't ready for this. I'm not sure which. But anyway, thank you everyone in the chat for coming, for adding to the conversation. Thank you so much for Lone Spartan for coming on. It's been very interesting hearing about your journey.
Yeah, thank you for having me.
Okay.
I enjoyed it.
Okay. And everyone, live your life.